The desert wind carried dust and memory across the high plains of New Mexico Territory in the summer of 1878. Sarah Whitmore stood at the kitchen window of her small ranch house, her hands submerged in a basin of cold water as she scrubbed potatoes for the evening meal. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it circled over the mesa. She had been alone for 3 years now, since the consumption took her husband Daniel and left her with nothing but 200 acres of stubborn land, a dozen cattle, and a mortgage she could barely meet. She began to hum as she worked, a melody her mother had taught her back in Ohio before the war, before everything changed, before she followed a young man's dream westward only to bury him beneath the cottonwood tree behind the barn. The tune was wordless but full of longing, a song that seemed to capture all the beauty and heartbreak of this vast, unforgiving country. Her voice rose and fell with the rhythm of her hands moving through the water, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music carry her somewhere beyond the endless chores and the gnawing worry about whether she could hold on to this place through another winter. She did not hear the horse approach. She did not see the rider dismount near the well or notice when he stopped, one hand resting on the weathered fence post, his hat tilted back as he listened. The cowboy stood perfectly still, his dust-covered clothes marking him as a man who had been riding for days, his face shadowed but his eyes caught by something he had not expected to find in this lonely corner of the territory. He had been heading north toward Colorado, running from mistakes he had made in Texas, from a gambling debt and a fight that went too far, from the kind of past that chased a man across state lines. But now, hearing that voice floating through the open kitchen window, he felt something shift inside him, like a door he had forgotten existed suddenly swinging open. Sarah finished with the potatoes and moved to the stove, stoking the fire and still humming that haunting melody. She added wood to the flames and set a cast iron pot on the heat, then turned to slice onions on the worn wooden counter. The cowboy took a step closer, drawn by the music as surely as a thirsty man to water. He knew he should move on. That lingering here was foolish, that every moment he stayed in one place increased the chance that the men looking for him might catch up. But he could not make himself leave. There was something in that voice, something that spoke of home and hope, and all the things he had lost or thrown away in his 29 years of living. When the humming stopped, the silence felt sudden and sharp. Sarah wiped her hands on her apron and stepped toward the window to check on the sky, wondering if she had time to gather the chickens before dark. That was when she saw him, a tall figure standing by her fence, his horse grazing nearby. Her heart jumped, and her hand instinctively moved toward the rifle she kept propped near the door. Living alone had taught her caution. Drifters came through sometimes, and not all of them were trustworthy. The territory was full of desperate men, outlaws, and wanderers who had left civilization behind for reasons both noble and criminal. She opened the door slowly, the rifle held loosely but ready. The evening light fell across her face, revealing a woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, her features marked by sun and hardship, but still beautiful in a way that spoke of strength rather than softness. Her eyes were the color of creek water, clear and watchful. The cowboy removed his hat when he saw her, a gesture of respect that seemed almost automatic, bred into him by a mother he barely remembered. "Mum," he said, his voice rough from days without much conversation. "I didn't mean to startle you. I heard your singing and I stopped to listen. It's been a long time since I heard anything so fine." Sarah studied him carefully. He was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from hard work rather than easy living. His face was weathered, his jaw covered in several days of stubble, and his eyes were a startling blue beneath the brim of his hat. There was something wounded in those eyes, something that made her think of a dog that had been kicked too many times but still hoped for kindness. She did not lower the rifle, but she did not raise it either. "You're on private land," she said, her voice steady. "I don't recall inviting visitors." "No, Mom, you did not. I apologize for the intrusion. I was just passing through, heading north. Saw your place from the ridge and thought I might ask if you could spare some water for my horse. I can pay." He reached slowly into his pocket, and Sarah tensed, but he only pulled out a few coins, holding them up so she could see. "I don't want any trouble. Just water. And then I'll be on my way." Something in his manner convinced her that he was telling the truth, or at least enough of it. She had learned to read men in her years out here, to sense danger in the way they moved or spoke. This one seemed more lost than threatening, more tired than violent. Still, she kept her distance as she nodded toward the well. "Water's free for those who need it," she said. "But you take it and move on. I'm not running a boarding house?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." He led his horse to the well and began working the pump, filling his hat with water first and letting the animal drink. Sarah watched from the doorway, the rifle still in her hands but pointed at the ground now. She noticed the way he moved, careful and deliberate, and the way he spoke quietly to his horse, gentle words that revealed a kindness beneath the rough exterior. When the horse had drunk its fill, he refilled his canteen and splashed water on his own face, washing away some of the dust. He was preparing to mount up when his stomach growled loud enough for Sarah to hear it from where she stood. He looked embarrassed, pressing a hand to his belly as if he could silence it through will alone. Sarah felt something soften in her chest, a feeling she had been trying to suppress for years because sympathy was a luxury she could not afford. But she thought of Daniel, of how many times strangers had shown them kindness when they were traveling west, how a hot meal or a safe place to sleep had sometimes made the difference between surviving and giving up. "When's the last time you ate?" she called out. The cowboy hesitated, as if considering whether honesty was wise. "2 days ago. Had some hardtack and jerky, but I ran out yesterday morning." Sarah sighed, knowing she would regret this. Knowing it was foolish to invite a stranger into her home, knowing that every scrap of food mattered when you were barely scraping by. But she also knew that some parts of humanity could not be sacrificed, even for survival, or else what was the point of surviving at all? "I've got stew cooking," she said. "Nothing fancy, just potatoes and onions and a little salt pork. But it's hot, and there's enough for 2 if you're of a mind to eat before you go." The cowboy looked at her with something like wonder, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. "Mom, I couldn't impose like that. You've already been more than generous. I'm not asking you to move in," Sarah said, a hint of sharpness returning to her voice. "I'm offering you a bowl of stew. You can accept it or not, but make up your mind quick because the sun's going down and I've got evening chores to finish." He nodded, still holding his hat in his hands. "Then I accept with gratitude, and if there's work I can do to repay the kindness, I'm willing." Sarah considered this. There was always work on a ranch, always something that needed fixing or mending or building. Her fence line had weak spots she had been meaning to repair, and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. But accepting his help meant letting him stay longer, meant opening herself up to questions and conversation, meant risking the careful solitude she had built around herself like armor. "We'll see," she said finally. "Come inside and wash up properly. There's a basin on the porch." The cowboy did as he was told, scrubbing his hands and face with the harsh lye soap Sarah left out, then following her into the small kitchen. The room was simple but clean, with a wooden table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with jars of preserved vegetables and fruits. The stove gave off a comforting heat, and the smell of the stew filled the air with a homey warmth that made his chest ache with memories of things he had lost. Sarah ladled out 2 bowls and set them on the table along with a half loaf of bread she had baked that morning. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. The cowboy bowed his head briefly, lips moving in a silent prayer, and Sarah was surprised to find herself doing the same, a habit she had let slip in recent years. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls in the pop and hiss of the fire in the stove. "This is fine cooking, ma'am," the cowboy said after several minutes. "Best meal I've had in longer than I care to admit." "It's plain food," Sarah replied, "but it's honest. Honest is good. Honest is more than most things in this world." He paused, then added, "My name's James Calloway. Folks used to call me Cal. Back when I had folks." Sarah debated whether to give her name in return, whether that small exchange would create a connection she was not ready for, but it seemed churlish to refuse such a simple courtesy. "Sarah Whitmore, this is my land, or it will be for another few months if I can make the bank payment." "You work this place alone?" Cal asked, looking around at the small but well-maintained house. "For 3 years now. My husband passed from the consumption. Didn't have children, just each other, and then just me." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Cal heard the weight beneath the words. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. "That's a heavy burden for one person to carry." "We all carry something," Sarah said, meeting his eyes. What are you carrying? James Calloway. The directness of the question caught him off guard. Most people did not want to know the truth about the drifters and wanderers who passed through their lives. But something in Sarah's gaze told him she was not most people, that she had seen enough of life to understand that running and staying were sometimes two sides of the same coin. Mistakes, he said simply. Bad choices and worse luck. Got into debt gambling in Fort Worth, then got into a fight with a man who turned out to be connected to some powerful people. Killed him in self-defense. But self-defense don't always matter when the dead man has friends with money. So I'm heading north, hoping to find work in Colorado. Maybe start over where nobody knows my name or my face. Sarah absorbed this information without visible reaction. She had suspected he was running from something. Most men traveling alone and looking half-starved were. But she appreciated his honesty, the way he did not try to dress up his story or make himself sound like a victim. You planning to keep running forever? Cal stared into his bowl, swirling the remaining stew with his spoon. Don't know that I have much choice. The kind of men looking for me don't forgive and they don't forget. Best I can do is put enough distance between us that they lose interest or lose the trail. That's a lonely way to live, Sarah said quietly. Yes, ma'am, it is. But lonely is better than dead, and dead is where I'll end up if I stay in one place too long. He looked up at her, and something in his expression was both vulnerable and defiant. What about you? You ever think about leaving this place? Selling the land and going back east? Maybe living somewhere with neighbors and a church and a general store you don't have to ride half a day to reach? Sarah shook her head slowly. This land is all I have left of Daniel of our dreams. We picked this spot together, built this house with our own hands, planted every fence post and dug the well through rock and hardpan. If I leave, then all of it was for nothing. His death was for nothing. I won't accept that, even if staying might break you. Cal asked gently. Even then. Because some things are worth breaking for. They finished their meal in thoughtful silence, and when the bowls were empty, Cal stood and began clearing the table without being asked. Sarah started to protest, but he was already at the basin, washing the dishes with the same careful attention he had shown with his horse. She watched him, this stranger who had appeared at her fence drawn by a melody, and wondered what providence had brought him here on this particular evening. When the kitchen was clean, Cal moved toward the door, reaching for his hat. I'm grateful for the meal and the kindness, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll be moving on now. Let you get to your evening chores in peace. But Sarah found herself speaking before she had fully thought through the words. Those weak spots in my fence line I mentioned. If you were to help me repair them tomorrow, I could offer you breakfast and a place to sleep in the barn tonight. Nothing fancy, just some hay and a blanket, but it's shelter and it's safe. Cal turned to look at her, surprise and something like hope flickering across his face. You sure about that, ma'am? I'm a stranger, and you've got no reason to trust me. No, I don't, Sarah agreed. But I've also got no reason to think you're anything other than what you seem. A man who's fallen on hard times and could use a helping hand. Besides, I could use the help with those fences, and pride won't hold back the cattle when they decide to wander. Consider it a fair trade. Cal nodded slowly, understanding that she was giving him something more valuable than shelter or food. She was giving him a chance to be useful, to earn his keep, to be something other than a man running from his past. Then I accept with gratitude, and I promise you won't regret it. See that I don't, Sarah said. But there was the faint hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. That night, Cal made his bed in the barn, spreading his bedroll in the hayloft where he could smell the sweet dried grass and hear the gentle movements of the cattle in the nearby corral. He lay awake for a long time, staring up at the gaps in the roof where starlight leaked through, thinking about the woman in the house and the melody that had stopped him in his tracks. He thought about the life he had been living, always moving, always running, never allowing himself to settle or connect or hope for anything beyond the next town, the next meal, the next sunrise. It was a kind of death, he realized, this constant flight, different from the death his pursuers wanted to give him, but death nonetheless. In the house, Sarah lay in her own bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the night and thinking about the stranger in her barn. She knew she was taking a risk, knew that Daniel would have probably counseled more caution. But she also knew that living in fear was its own kind of prison, and she had not survived 3 years alone by being timid. There was something about James Calloway that resonated with her own loneliness, her own sense of being adrift in a world that had taken away the one thing that mattered most. Perhaps that recognition was dangerous, or perhaps it was exactly what they both needed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the promise of heat shimmering on the horizon. Sarah was up before sunrise, as always, starting the fire and putting on coffee before heading out to feed the chickens and collect eggs. She found Cal already awake, checking his horse's shoes and talking quietly to the animal. When he saw her, he straightened and tipped his hat. "Morning, ma'am. I hope I didn't wake you. Old habits die hard, and I've been rising with the sun since I was a boy. No harm done. I'm an early riser myself. Coffee's on if you want some, and I'll have breakfast ready shortly." They worked through the morning with a comfortable efficiency, eating a simple meal of eggs and bread before gathering tools and heading out to the fence line. Cal proved to be a capable worker, strong and knowledgeable about ranch work. As they stretched wire and pounded posts, he told her stories of other places he had worked, other ranches and cattle drives, and Sarah found herself sharing memories of her early days on the land with Daniel, the struggles and small victories that had marked their time together. The sun climbed higher, and they paused in the shade of a cottonwood to share water from a canteen. Cal wiped sweat from his forehead and looked out across the rolling land, the endless vista of grass and sage and distant mountains. "It's beautiful country," he said. "Hard but beautiful. I can see why you fight to keep it." "It gets in your blood," Sarah said. "The space, the silence, the way you can see weather coming from miles away." Back east, everything felt crowded, like the world was pressing in from all sides. "Out here you can breathe. You can also disappear," Cal said quietly. "A person could vanish into all this space and never be found." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Is that what you want? To disappear?" Cal was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. "I thought it was. I thought if I could just get far enough away, start over somewhere nobody knew me, I could leave behind all the things I've done wrong. But lately I've been wondering if maybe what I'm really running from is myself, and that's a race I can't win." "No," Sarah agreed. "That's one race nobody wins. Eventually you have to stop and face whatever's chasing you, whether it's other people or your own demons. What if facing it means dying? What if running means never really living?" They returned to work, the conversation hanging between them like smoke. By late afternoon, they had repaired a significant stretch of fence, and Cal's hands were blistered despite their calluses. Sarah noticed and felt a twinge of guilt, but he waved off her concern. "Honest work for honest pay," he said. "My hands will heal." That evening, Sarah prepared another simple meal, and they ate together again at the small kitchen table. The conversation flowed more easily now, moving from stories of the past to observations about the present, from serious topics to moments of unexpected laughter. Sarah found herself smiling more than she had in months, and Cal felt some of the tension that had been coiled in his chest for so long beginning to loosen. "You ever think about singing professionally?" Cal asked as they cleaned up after dinner. "In a saloon or a theater, I mean. You've got a voice that could make a man forget his troubles." Sarah laughed, a sound that surprised them both. "Me in a saloon." Daniel used to say the same thing, but that life never appealed to me. Besides, who would I be singing for? Cowboys and miners who are too drunk to appreciate it. "You'd be surprised?" Cal said. "Sometimes the roughest men are the ones who need beauty most. They've seen so much ugliness, so much violence and hardship, that when they encounter something pure and true, it hits them hard. Like it hit me yesterday standing by your fence and hearing that melody." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, a blush she had not experienced in years. "It was just an old song. Nothing special. It was special to me," Cal said, and with sincerity in his voice made her look away. That night, as Cal prepared to return to the barn, Sarah stopped him at the door. "The fence work isn't finished," she said. "And there's the barn door that needs fixing, and some shingles on the roof that need replacing before winter. If you were willing to stay on for a few more days, I could pay you a small wage. Not much, but fair for the work." Cal searched her face, trying to understand what she was really offering. "You sure that's wise, Mrs. Whitmore? The longer I stay, the more risk I bring to your door." "Let me worry about my door," Sarah said firmly. "I'm making a business proposition, that's all. Good workers are hard to find out here, and you've proven yourself capable. It would be foolish of me not to take advantage of the help while it's available." "A business proposition," Cal repeated, and there was something in his tone that suggested he understood it was more than that, but was gentleman enough not to say so. Then I accept, but only if you promise to tell me if you want me gone. I won't overstay my welcome. I'll tell you. Sarah promised, though she was not sure she believed herself. Days turned into a week, and the week stretched toward 2. Cal worked tirelessly, repairing everything that needed fixing and finding new projects when those were done. He built a new chicken coop that was sturdier than the old one, reinforced the barn's foundation, and helped Sarah move a water trough to a better location. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch as the sun set, sometimes talking, sometimes simply existing in comfortable silence. Sarah began to hum again while she cooked, and then to sing the words to the old songs, and Cal would listen from wherever he was working, the sound reaching him like a lifeline thrown across dark water. He told her more about his past, not just the recent troubles but the whole story, an orphaned childhood, years of drifting work, the loneliness that had driven him to gambling halls and bad decisions. Sarah shared her own history, the parents she had left behind in Ohio, the journey west that had been full of hope and danger, the love she had found with Daniel and the grief that followed his death. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the stars emerge, when Sarah asked the question that had been on her mind for days. How long before they stopped looking for you? The men from Texas. Cal was quiet, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. Could be never. Could be they've already given up. No way to know unless I go back, and going back would be suicide. So you're trapped, Sarah said. You can't go forward because you're running, and you can't go back because you're afraid. That's about the size of it. What if you stopped running? Cal turned to look at her, confusion in his eyes. I told you what happens if I stop. Those men won't give me a fair trial or let me explain. They'll just put a bullet in me and call it justice. What if you stopped running here? Sarah said, and now there was something fierce in her voice, something that demanded his attention. What if you stayed and helped me work this land? What if we built something together, something worth defending? Cal stared at her, and for a moment he could not speak. Sarah, he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. You're talking about me staying permanently. You're talking about making a stand. I'm talking about living instead of just surviving, Sarah said. Both of us. I'm tired of being alone. Tired of fighting this land by myself. Tired of going to bed every night wondering if I'll lose everything. And you're tired of running, tired of looking over your shoulder, tired of never having a place to call home. Maybe we could help each other. Maybe together we could be stronger than we are apart. And when those men come, because they will come eventually, if they haven't given up, then we face them together. We get help from the neighboring ranchers, we stand our ground. We do what people out here have always done when trouble comes. We survive. Cal stood and walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing hard enough that his knuckles went white. You're asking me to risk your life along with my own? I can't do that, Sarah. I won't. Sarah rose and came to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence like warmth from a fire. I'm not asking for your permission to risk my own life. I'm a grown woman, and I've survived out here alone for 3 years. I can make my own choices. I'm asking you to choose to stay, to choose to fight for something instead of just running from it. What if I fail? Cal's voice was barely above a whisper. What if I stay and I bring death to your door and destroy everything you've built? What if you don't? Sarah countered. What if you stay and we build something beautiful? What if we take this hard land and these hard lives and make them into something worth having? Isn't that possibility worth the risk? Cal looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who had fed him and given him work, but someone who understood loneliness as deeply as he did, someone who had faced loss and kept going, someone who was brave enough to reach out across the divide of fear and isolation and ask for connection. He saw in her eyes the same hunger he felt, the same desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be more than mere survival. I killed a man, he said, needing her to understand the full weight of what she was asking. I took a life, and even though it was self-defense, even though he drew on me first, I still see his face every night before I sleep. I'm not a good man, Sarah. I'm broken. We're all broken, Sarah said gently. The question is whether we break alone or together. Cal felt something inside him give way, like a dam that had been holding back a flood. He turned to her and took her hands in his, feeling the calluses and the strength there. If I stay, He said slowly, "I'll give you everything I have. I'll work this land like it's my own. I'll protect you with my life. And I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. But you have to know that trouble is coming. And when it does, things might get ugly. Then we'll face ugly together," Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice. "And maybe we'll make it through to the other side." They stood there on the porch as night fell completely, hands clasped, and made a silent pact that would change both their lives. Cal leaned forward and kissed her forehead gently, a gesture that was both promise and prayer. And Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel something she had thought lost forever: hope. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and quiet joy. Cal moved his things from the barn to the small room off the kitchen that Sarah had kept closed since Daniel's death. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, expanding the cattle herd, improving the property, preparing for winter. In the evenings, Sarah would cook while humming her melodies, and Cal would sit at the table watching her, marveling at how something as simple as domesticity could feel like a miracle. They grew closer, not through grand gestures but through 1,000 small moments. The way Cal would bring her coffee in the morning, the way Sarah would mend his shirts without being asked, the conversations that stretched late into the night about dreams and fears and everything in between. They did not rush into romance, both carrying too many scars to move carelessly, but they built something deeper: partnership, friendship, trust. Then, on a cold morning in early October, 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Cal saw them first and felt his blood turn to ice. He recognized the lead rider even at a distance: Marcus Webb, the brother of the man Cal had killed in Texas. Webb had followed the trail all the way north, driven by grief and rage and a thirst for vengeance that had not dimmed with the miles. Cal found Sarah in the barn and told her what he had seen. Her face went pale, but her voice was steady. "Then we face it," she said. "Go into town and get Sheriff Morrison. Tell him we need help. I'll hold them off here."
"Sarah, no."
"I won't leave you alone with them. You have to. If they see you here, they'll attack immediately. If it's just me, they'll talk first, and that gives us time. Go now, Cal. Trust me." It went against every instinct, but Cal knew she was right. He kissed her hard, a kiss that tasted of fear and love and desperation, then mounted his horse and rode hard toward the distant town. Sarah watched him go, then went into the house and took down the rifle. She positioned herself on the porch, the weapon across her lap, and waited as the 3 riders descended from the ridge. They stopped at the fence line, and Marcus Webb dismounted slowly, his hands visible to show he was not reaching for his gun. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and grim-faced, with eyes that held the weight of loss. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'm Marcus Webb from Fort Worth, Texas. I'm looking for a man named James Calloway. I have reason to believe he's been here." "State your business, Mr. Webb," Sarah called back, her voice not wavering. "Calloway murdered my brother in a saloon 2 months ago. Shot him down in cold blood over a card game. I've tracked him all this way and I intend to see justice done." "That's not how I heard it," Sarah said. "The way I heard it, your brother drew first and Calloway defended himself. That's not murder, that's survival." Webb's face darkened. "My brother wouldn't draw on a man without cause. Calloway provoked him, cheated him, and then killed him. Now where is he? Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. And I suggest you leave my property before you find yourself on the wrong end of this rifle." One of Webb's companions, a wary man with a cruel mouth, laughed. "You going to take on all 3 of us, lady? That's a quick way to die." "Maybe," Sarah said, and now there was something cold in her voice. "But I guarantee I'll take at least one of you with me. Question is, which one wants to be first?" The 3 men looked at each other, surprised by her resolve. Webb raised a hand to calm his companions. "We don't want trouble with you, ma'am. This is between me and Calloway. Just tell us where he is and we'll be on our way. And if I tell you he's not here, that he moved on weeks ago, then we'll keep looking. But if we find out you're lying, we'll come back and it won't be so friendly." Sarah stood, the rifle now held ready. "You're threatening me on my own land, Mr. Webb. That's a mistake. Now I'm going to say this once you leave. Go back to Texas and let the law handle this if there's really a case to be made. But don't bring your vendetta to my door." Webb's hand moved toward his gun, and Sarah raised the rifle, her finger on the trigger. For a long, frozen moment, they stared at each other across the distance, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the ridge, came the sound of multiple horses, and Sheriff Morrison appeared with Cal and 4 deputized townsmen. The sheriff was an older man with a gray mustache and the weathered look of someone who had seen his share of trouble. "That's enough," Morrison called out, riding down to position himself between Sarah's porch and the 3 Texans. "I'm Sheriff Morrison, and I'm telling you men to stand down. Whatever grievance you have, it'll be settled through proper legal channels, not through vigilante justice on my watch." Webb looked at the sheriff, then at the armed men with him, calculating his odds. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. It's a Texas matter. You're in New Mexico territory now, which makes it my matter. Now I've heard both sides of this story, and from what I can tell, your brother drew first in a fair fight. That's not murder, and you know it. You're letting grief cloud your judgment. My brother is dead," Webb said, and now his voice was thick with emotion. "Someone has to pay. Your brother made a choice and it cost him his life," Morrison said, not unkindly. "That's a hard truth, but it's the truth nonetheless. Don't compound the tragedy by throwing your own life away for revenge." Webb stood there, his jaw working, torn between rage and reason. Finally, he looked at Cal, who had dismounted and now stood beside Sarah on the porch. "You took my brother from me," Webb said. "I hope you can live with that." "I think about it every day," Cal said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but I won't apologize for defending my life. Your brother gave me no choice." The 2 men stared at each other across the yard, and something passed between them, not forgiveness, but perhaps a recognition of shared humanity, of the way violence ripples outward and destroys more than just the people directly involved. Webb finally nodded once, a sharp, bitter gesture, then remounted his horse. "This isn't over," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Morrison said firmly. "It's over, Webb. Go home, mourn your brother properly, and let this go." The 3 Texans rode away slowly, and everyone watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did Sarah lower the rifle, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Cal moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her, and she leaned into him, feeling the fear finally catch up with her now that the danger had passed. "You could have been killed," Cal said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "When I rode away and left you alone with them, I thought I might never see you again. But you did see me again," Sarah said, pulling back to look at him. "Because we trusted each other, because we had a plan, and because we didn't face it alone. That's what I was trying to tell you. Together, we're stronger." Sheriff Morrison approached the porch, tipping his hat to Sarah. "That was brave, Mrs. Whitmore, but also mighty foolish. You shouldn't have put yourself in that position." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But this is my land and this is my life, and I'll defend both however I see fit." The sheriff looked between Sarah and Cal, understanding passing across his weathered face. "I see. Well then, I suppose congratulations are in order. You 2 planning to make this official?" Sarah and Cal looked at each other, and slowly they both smiled. "Well, hadn't discussed it formally," Cal said, "but yes, I believe that's